Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. This week we have a new hard techno tutorial, this time on Alex Farell. So for this tutorial I've been using two of these reference tracks that you have on the screen. Be sure to check the link in the description if you want to follow along and get the project file. I want to thank you so much already for the support you're giving to the channel by liking, commenting or activating the notifications. And let's start the tutorial. So I'm gonna start first with the kick bass group. So I think there's a few principles that I can give you for this kind of psytrance hard techno kicks, especially for the bass. I think there's a rumble underneath, and this is really the difference with the original psytrance tracks. I think this rumble is really giving the drive and the movement underneath with the kick. So that's why I'm adding this rumble channel. Also, I think another thing, and this is typical to Alex Farell's track, is that for the Psybass you have a filter, which means you don't have this very high-end frequency in the Psybass, so like these. So this is really muffled through a filter, and the movement is really going to be in the mids, and the resonating frequencies will be in the mids, low mids. And the last thing is regarding the kick. You usually have a harder kind of kick for the hard techno tracks than the usual psytrance. So it's really just a punch, but it's really like put forward and a bit more beefy. So I'm going to show you in the group what I did in terms of processing. So as usual, I have lots of processing on the group, and this is really what gives life to the kick. So especially with distortion and compression. So you see, if I withdraw my chain, I will lose the power from this kick. And if I add it, it's really like resonating way more in that frequency area. So just quickly to explain what I did on this group chain, I have first this utility just to make sure my bass is in mono. I have the amp. This is really to put forward a bit the high end and also to distort a bit the bass. I have then an EQ. So just a comment about the EQ that you're going to see in this video. Be careful, because sometimes I can be a bit messy with my EQs. I sometimes add a bit too much EQ, like 2 or 3 EQs in the channels, because I go back and forth between the different channels to mix it. So it's not like the most academic way to do it. I think what you must take away from this video is really the different principles that I use to create those kind of sounds. And then you can just reuse it in your own tracks and really understand how it was built. So here I have this EQ just to withdraw a bit of resonances. So for instance, I had this one, which is very slight here. I had my kick punch that was a bit too much here, so that's what I withdraw this nasty resonancy. So I then have my drum bus. The drum bus is really important because it's really gonna glue everything together. So you see it really glues, especially here in that low mids. But be careful with the drum bus, because if you put it 100%, usually it's gonna be too compressed. So that's why I use it like 54% here, and I adjust the trim to put it down a bit. It's gonna be more effective and not squash the whole mix. I then use an EQ3. Sometimes it's interesting because it kind of flips the phase, and sometimes I get better result for my kick punch, like here, and I just add a bit of high end, then just a last EQ, and then limiting. So quite a lot of limiting, because for this style you have to be loud. It's also compressed. The kick really is going to be put forward and drive the track. So now if we go into the different channels, you have first a kick punch. So for the kick punch, you just need to take like a sample that's clean. You just want clean punch. So to make this one, I've used a Vengeance kick sample. I just used the different faders just to withdraw a bit that punch tail so that it doesn't interfere with my bass. Then I just EQ, because of course I'm gonna have a bit of resonancy, especially afterwards with the distortion. So you see it resonates a lot in those mid frequencies. So really take the time to try and redraw some frequency areas and see if it works. So you can also boost them to identify what's resonating. And I also did it on the group here. So yeah, just a bit of EQ, just a top kick here, to add a bit of transient, again, a bit of EQ, but not much processing here. We just want a clean punch. Then I have my rumble and Psybass group. So on this one, I started off with the rumble, and what I want here is really just the sub. So just to play around with the kick. I use a sample because that way I can try different rumbles and I can see what's better with my kick, especially in terms of key and also in terms of resonating frequency. Of course, a sidechain with that fader, and I also EQ like this because I don't want the frequency in the mids. That's going to be the area for the Psybass. So next I have my Psybass. So I use this sample from KSHMR. What I do is directly using that EQ because I don't want the sub bass. I already have it in my rumble. And I also muffle this sample through a filter so that I don't have the higher frequencies. So this is especially for this style. I have then the sidechain. So for the sidechain, I think this is also the main element in which you can create different textures and different kicks because you will have different sidechain on the different channels. So for this one, for instance, I choose to keep the high end and let it pass through, so that it gives a different groove. And then I have a mid chain, mid frequencies, and this one, the sidechain is a bit sharper. And that way you can create different kind of movements. You can play around with the band, you can choose the different frequencies, and you can add different layers in the high end, in the mids to have different sidechain. Of course, in the lows, you're gonna keep the sidechain clean so that it doesn't interfere with the kick. So I have this second layer. Also, I have added a delay, and this is also something that you can use to create some movement. And then on the group, again, just some EQs, so that it's well mixed with the kick. And I have just a bit of saturation with parallel processing here, just a last sidechain, and that's it for this group. And finally, I have just a last layer, which is also to give a bit more texture and room to the kick. So I have this high layer, which is the same Psybass. And again, different sidechain, some delay, and just a bit of EQ. So this time it's just the very high end. And I have a room channel, which is just a triplet like this that I use from the kick. And it's just to give a bit more room again. So a bit of reverb, sidechain, and that's it. And I have another mid layer here that I use at some point in the track. Again, just EQing that very, very mid layer, and again, different kind of sidechain. I have a last layer that I use at the end, which is another Psybass. And it's just gonna add a little something on top of it. And again, sidechain, delay, and EQ. There's also one thing on which you can act to create different kind of Psybass, and it's really here, the tail of your Psybass. So you can play with the tail here and reduce it, and it's just gonna create another kind of effect. So depending on the style that you want to do, you can also do this. And that's pretty much it for the kick bass group. Just add the last few EQs and amp on this last group, and that's pretty much it. And I just have another layer of kick ambience, and also that's something that I think Alex Farell is doing. So you really have like those kind of reverby sound that accompany the kick. So that's what I did here. I have this layer. So I created this with some impacts that I just fade like this. And you can play around with the pitch to create different kind of sweeps. And also I've put some auto filter that you can use here. You can also add an amount of LFO so that it moves, and you can put also some delays here. That's what I did here. And the sweep here is just more loopy. But yeah, just be careful, put some sidechain on and really EQ. And there's a last one here. and it creates this rhythm. And I just add at the end of every 2 bars this clap reverse, which is just a clap that I reversed like this, and it just brings kind of a background movement at the end of each 2 bars. And there's something very typical that Alex Farell is doing in his automation and arrangement. It's really to have the kick first with an auto filter, so only really the sub and low mids, like this in the intro, and then it first starts the track with the full kick on, like this. And that's pretty much it for the kick ambience part. Now we're gonna go through the drums. So for the drums, I have a few groups. First 2 groups related to some claps, then we'll have the hi-hats. So just for the clap, I think in Alex Farell's track, it's not really used as an element that's really put forward and more like an ambience thing. So that's why it's not too high in volume, and I just use it here and there, just in the intro especially. So to do this kind of clap, really easy. I just add a clap sample, a 909, and a snare. The snare is going to bring the punch, the clap, more of the texture. And then I just use the overdrive to distort the drum bus, and I play around with the transient so that it's more slappy, and then just a reverb. For the reverb, I'm going to use either ambience reverb or some kind of a plate reverb. And what you can do to make it more clean is really play with the low cut so that you don't have the lower frequencies. And especially in Alex Farell's track, is really using those reverby sounds that are higher in frequency, almost like some sweeps, and this really brings some ambience and fullness to the mix. So that's what I use here, just a clap, normal pattern, and I have just the channel that I call clap answer, which is really just a small pattern like this, and sometimes, and so it plays like a call and answer. And again, it's just to bring a bit more ambience with the reverb and a bit of delay also. So nothing special, just a 909, just the same samples, 909 snare and clap, and the same processing here. It's just a duplicated channel. So next up, I have my drum group. So first, I have some open hats, and this one is very typical from Alex Farell. So he's using this 909 open hat, and you can control the decay here. That's what I did with the sampler. So he plays this very specific pattern first, and then brings a bit more movement with some notes with very low velocity like this. And also you have the reverb that is increased, especially in the return channel, so that you create this kind of effect in the breakdown to bring a kind of sweep, and then it releases, and then you have the drop. So he does that in a few of his tracks. And here, yeah, it's just an open hat, this kind of pattern. Here you create the movement and you put very low velocity so that it doesn't interfere, and you really still hear those main open hats. And in terms of processing, you can control the transient also with those kind of a plugin, and then it's just lots of EQs so that it doesn't resonate. So here it's a bit messy, but it's really working. You see those hi-hats can be very resonating. So what you gotta do is really lower or boost some frequency areas to identify the resonances and then withdraw them. Usually you have some cuts to do around 4K, which is a very typical resonancy area. Also at 10K, and then you can also identify visually, or you can hear them, some resonating frequencies. So this one, for instance. And then it's just the room. So I use my Valhalla vintage reverb, same as the other channels, and making sure I don't have the low frequencies on it. I then have another channel, which is another open hat. Well, it's placed as an open hat, but I'm actually using a closed hi-hat. I also make sure I don't have too much transient. That's why I put the beginning of the sample here. And then it's the same kind of processing. So I just distort so that it's a bit more hard and a bit more noisy. And then I just identify my resonances, like this one, and a bit of EQ on my reverb. And finally, I have this open hat. So first, it kind of plays with the open hat like this. Again, I play with the velocity, and here it's an open hat. And I think it's the same processing, just a bit of delay. Let's put also here. And then again, I just withdraw the resonances. So this one, I withdraw it so that it's more of a closed hi-hat actually, because this one is very typical of a open hat. And then I switch at the drop, I switch the pattern, and this time I use this very straightforward hi-hat 16th pattern with a bit of velocity movement here. And that brings this kind of drive. And finally, I have my ride, which is very simple. That is what Alex Farell is using sometimes. So it's very straightforward 4x4 kind of ride. And it's just a 909, and you will find the same processing here. So controlling the transient, saturating, adding the room, sidechaining, and EQing. This is the typical chain for my drums. And just on the group, I glue a bit the whole thing with the overdrive. I had a bit of Valhalla Vintage reverb, especially in plates, and really only the higher end. And this is gonna create a bit of that ambience and room. And you typically have this on Alex Farell's track. I had a bit of width, sidechaining again because I had some reverb, and just a last EQ. And that's pretty much it for my drums. Okay, so next up is my vocal. So I think in a lot of his track, Alex Farell is using vocals and more like loopy vocals in the background, sometimes as a lead, but really something that's drowned into some reverb and that creates something wide. So what you can do to make this is use a vocal sample. So this time I think I use this vocal sample. So at first this was the sample. What I did is first pitch it down like this to create the pitch that was more fitting to the key of my track. I then put this at the right placement so that it's more groovy with my kick. Like this. And then I just put it lots of reverb. I think the pitch was a bit different, but that's how I did it. And then you just can use also the faders to adjust how you want it to sound and to interact with the kick. And so I create something very wide with the reverb, with the delay, with the auto pan so that it moves. And then it's just lots of EQs again because it was resonating a lot. Like this. And then I play also with the auto filter. I think it's more open here, then it's a bit more narrow at the end. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And then it's just a kind of loop like this that call and answer with the kick and with the sidechain. It works pretty much like this. I also add a little sweep to introduce it. So to do this, it's very simple. You just take the sample, you add the reverb, 100%, with a long reverb. Then you freeze and flatten. That way you get this tail. You reduce it a bit because sometimes there's too much transient. So for instance, like this. And then you just have to take that part, boost a bit the gain, make another one, reverse it, and you get your vocal. You can still adjust with a bit of EQ, and you can actually add another reverb and do the same thing another time if you want it to be more in the background and more like reverby. This is how you do this kind of sweeps. And finally, I have this other loopy lead. This time I used an impact, not a vocal, and this is actually like a part of a tail of an impact. And yeah, it's kind of the same processing, so some delay, some reverb, sidechaining, EQing, again, nasty resonances. And again, it's really like playing around. With the sidechain, it really works with the kick. And that's it for the vocals. So now I have my leads. So in Alex Farell's track, there are typical leads that you can find, especially sometimes he uses some screeches with very small notes and it's played as a lead or either in the background. So here I'd use it as a background. It's just for the intro. So I took a sample from my free sample pack on the screeches that you can get. And I just play it like this in the intro, and it's just a filter, some echo, and some reverb and sidechain. Nothing special here since it's used in the background. But what you have also in terms of lead in Alex Farell's track is really some FM sounds. So you can create your own FM sounds or use a sample. So here I'm using this sample that was fitting to the track. So these FM sounds are typically some kind of alarm sound, and you can create it very easily with Serum, for instance. You just have to take two oscillators. One is 0 dB, one is used as the main sound. You just add then some FM synthesis here. You activate it, and if you move the pitch, you're gonna go and create directly a kind of alarm sound. So here I took this one. I first use it as an intro sound. It's just the same sound as this one, but it's just one octave above. It's just played like a little pluck like this. But what I have to make some movement is a flanger, lots of echo, delay, and reverb. And it's really what creates the movement and makes the sound more lively, because without it, it's just something very dry. So it's just distorted with the amp, the overdrive here, and then it really brings to life with those reverb and delays. And then sidechain EQ as usual. And this is going to introduce it as for the drop. And then we have the full FM sound here. So with that kind of pattern. And it's one octave below. And this time we have the same processing. So the flanger, the distortion, some EQ, and the same delay, echo, reverb, and the sidechain. But this time I have less reverb because it's really placed as a lead and it has to be in front with the kick. So that's why I use it like this. And you have also a variation, and this is a typical lead that Alex Farell is doing, is playing around with the pitch bend. To do this, you have a very useful tool in Ableton. You go in your MIDI track, you go in envelope mode, and you choose MIDI control here and pitch bend, and you can play and make the pitch go up or go down as it plays. And I think he uses a lot this in his tracks. And I think that's it for the leads. And now final elements. This is the effects. I have just a few effects in my track. I have this short sweep that kind of introduce the new like 16th bars that are coming before the drops. So it's just a short sweep like this. I add just a reverb because it was a bit too much in front in the mix. And then EQ, of course. I'll then have lots of elements that are for my breakdown. And these are lots of sweeps, riser, snare roll, build up, everything that's going to bring and create some intensity before my drop. So I first introduce my breakdown with this white noise. And then my breakdown is starting. What I do is I create this intensity with a sweep up. This one is more like a riser. This one is more noisy. This one is more like a snare build up. And this one is another riser. Very EDM-ish, but this is what sometimes Alex Farell is using. And at the peak of the intensity here, just a white noise decrease and then some pre-drop fills. So I have this breakbeat. I have this tab, also something that's very used by Alex Farell. This is the T99 that you can get for free in the Rev Generator plugin. I just use an arpeggiator to create the fast pace pattern, and I use specific rates for the BPM of my track, and then the pre-drop fill. And then I have my drop. So all of these effects build the tension. They make sure I have smooth transition between the different parts of my track. And that concludes this video. I hope you liked it. Thank you so much for the support. Tell me if you got any questions, and I see you in the next one. Ciao, guys.